Imagine standing in a silent, foggy forest during the first thaw of spring. You see a group of villagers crouching in the damp shadows, but they aren't looking for deer or berries. They are frantically digging into the frozen mud with their bare fingernails, searching for pig nuts and bitter tubers hidden deep underground. These people are farmers, but today they are acting like starving animals just to survive the morning. But here's the strange part. The deeper they dig, the weirder the food gets. One man uses a sharpened wooden stick to pry open a rotting, hollow log. Inside, he finds a hibernating hedgehog curled into a ball of spines and a nest of dormant, frozen insects. He doesn't look disgusted. He carefully scoops the bugs into a dirty cloth sack because every gram of protein matters when a granary is empty. And then it gets worse. As the group moves deeper into the trees, they begin stripping the inner bark off birch trees and gathering handfuls of bright green lichen from the rocks. They aren't building a fire with these things. They are bringing them back to their huts to boil them into a slimy, flavorless paste. What happened next was unexpected. As they return to the village, they pass their own fields, which are completely empty. They have officially stopped being farmers and have become scavengers, turned the wild forest into a desperate, final grocery store just to stay alive for one more day. Imagine standing in a silent, foggy forest during the first thaw of spring. You see a group of villagers crouching in the damp shadows, but they aren't looking for deer or berries. They are frantically digging into the frozen mud with their bare fingernails, searching for pig nuts and bitter tubers hidden deep underground. These people are farmers, but today they are acting like starving animals just to survive the morning. But here's the strange part. The deeper they dig, the weirder the food gets. One man uses a sharpened wooden stick to pry open a rotting, hollow log. Inside, he finds a hibernating hedgehog curled into a ball of spines and a nest of dormant, frozen insects. He doesn't look disgusted. He carefully scoops the bugs into a dirty cloth sack because every gram of protein matters when a granary is empty. And then it gets worse. As the group moves deeper into the trees, they begin stripping the inner bark off birch trees and gathering handfuls of bright green lichen from the rocks. They aren't building a fire with these things. They are bringing them back to their huts to boil them into a slimy, flavorless paste. What happened next was unexpected. As they return to the village, they pass their own fields, which are completely empty. They have officially stopped being farmers and have become scavengers, turned the wild forest into a desperate, final grocery store just to stay alive for one more day. Imagine a heavy iron pot hanging over a flickering, weak flame in a drafty cottage. Inside, there isn't thick stew, but mostly bubbling water with a few withered, yellowish peas floating on the surface. A peasant man stands over the steam, clutching a handful of stinging nettles and bitter dandelions he found by the roadside. He tosses these wild weeds into the pot, stirring the thin, green liquid with a carved wooden spoon. But here's the strange part. He reaches into a small pouch and pulls out a single grayish animal bone. This bone is dry and porous because it has already been boiled 5 times this week. He drops it into the water, hoping to extract one last drop of fat or salt to flavor the soup. The family gathers around with wooden bowls, watching the water turn a murky brown, waiting for a meal that is mostly just hot air and salt. And then it gets worse. As the man serves the liquid, he realizes there is no bread left to soak up the broth. He searches the corners of his kitchen and finds a handful of dried bean husks that were meant for animal bedding. What happened next was unexpected. He grinds these husks into a coarse grit and throws them into the pot to add texture. The result is a gritty, watery potage of nothing that scrapes the throat as it goes down, but is the only thing keeping his family from collapsing before dawn. Imagine a father standing inside a cold timber barn, his hands trembling as he grips a small burlap sack. This isn't just any bag. It's the seed corn, the grain saved specifically to plant next year's harvest. He knows that if he opens it now, he will have nothing to grow in the spring, but his family hasn't eaten in days. With a heavy sigh, he tips the bag over, pouring the golden seeds into a grinding bowl to turn them into flour for tonight's dinner. But here's the strange part. Even that isn't enough to stop the hunger. He turns toward the corner of the barn where the family's only milk goat is tied to a post. The animal is thin, its ribs showing through its fur, because there is no grass left in the frozen fields to feed it. He picks up a sharpened iron knife and leads the goat toward the center of the room. He isn't just killing a pet. He is destroying his family's source of milk and cheese for years to come. And then it gets worse. As he prepares to strike, he realizes that once this meat is gone, there is absolutely nothing left to trade or eat. What happened next was unexpected. He begins to carefully harvest the goat's blood into a wooden pail. He plans to mix the warm blood with the crushed seed grain to create a thick, iron-rich porridge. By eating the seeds and the goat, he is surviving the next 24 hours, but he is officially trading his entire future for one final meal. Imagine a teenager standing in a muddy village square, clutching a crust of gray, fuzzy bread. This bread was made from damp rye that sat too long in a wet cellar, and it's covered in a dark, oily mold. He's so hungry that he shoves the entire piece into his mouth, chewing the bitter, spoiled grain and swallowing it down in seconds. But here's the strange part. Only a few minutes later, his hands begin to twitch and his eyes roll back into his head. He collapses into the dirt, clawing desperately at his arms and legs, as if his skin is being pressed against a red-hot iron. He screams that he is burning alive, even though the air is freezing cold. The other villagers stop their work and back away in terror, crossing themselves and whispering about demons. And then it gets worse. They don't realize that the demons are actually inside the bread he just ate. The toxic fungus in the rotted rye, known as ergot, is literally cutting off the blood flow to his fingers and toes. What happened next was unexpected. As the boy continues to thrash in the mud, the village priest approaches with a wooden cross, believing the boy's soul is under attack. In reality, the teenager is suffering from holy fire, a condition that causes terrifying hallucinations and can eventually make a person's limbs turn black and fall off. This was the ultimate gamble of the medieval peasant. Sometimes, the only food you could find was the very thing that would destroy you. Imagine a tired laborer sitting on a wobbly wooden bench inside a cold stone kitchen. He isn't holding a piece of meat or a vegetable. Instead, he is gripping a stiff brown strip of cured leather from an old horse harness. He uses a small knife to hack the leather into smaller bits before dropping them into a bubbling pot of water. He isn't making a tool. He is trying to make dinner. But here's the strange part. He has to keep that pot boiling for hours just to make the leather soft enough to bite. He sits by the fire, poking the floating scraps with a stick, waiting for the tough animal hide to turn into a rubbery jelly. Once the leather is finally soft, he fishes a piece out and dips it into a tiny, precious pile of salt on the table. He chews the salty strap slowly, working his jaw for several minutes just to swallow a single piece. And then it gets worse. As he eats, he realizes that this harness was the last piece of leather in the house. He looks down at his own feet and eyes his worn-out leather boots, wondering if he will have to boil them next. What happened next was unexpected. He saves the greasy water from the pot and drinks it like a broth. To a starving peasant, that leather wasn't just a discarded scrap. It was a final, desperate source of animal protein that could keep his heart beating for one more day. Imagine a long line of shivering peasants standing in the biting wind outside a massive stone monastery gate. Their hands are tucked into their thin wool sleeves as they stomp their feet on the frozen ground to stay warm. A heavy iron bolt slides back, and a monk in a dark habit emerges, carrying a heavy wooden bucket and a stack of grayish loaves. This is the dole, the only thing standing between these people and the grave. But here's the strange part. The food being handed out isn't fresh bread. The monk hands each person a chunk of bean bread, a dense, gritty brick made from dried peas and floor sweepings that is almost too hard to swallow. He uses a wooden ladle to pour a splash of thin, sour ale into their cups. This small beer is watery and sharp, but it's safer to drink than the local well water. And then it gets worse. As the line moves forward, the monk carefully measures each portion, ensuring no one receives a piece larger than a small fist. If a man tries to ask for more to feed a sick child at home, the monk simply shakes his head and gestures to the hundreds of people still waiting in the cold. What happened next was unexpected. Instead of walking away, the peasants huddle against the monastery walls, eating their tiny rations immediately in the dirt. They know that this meager, bitter charity is now the only grocery store left in the world, and without the church's bucket, they wouldn't survive until sunset.